Howdy folks, and welcome to another Taste of Gameplay video, this time for the French Tier 4 tech treat cruiser, the Duguay-Trouin. As always, these videos are designed to give you a sample of the gameplay of the ship, not to be an exhaustive analysis. I recommend the Wargaming Wiki or other content creators. I do actually speak reasonably good French, but I feel silly saying the Le Duguay-Trouin over and over again, so we'll call it the DT. First of all, the ship itself. This is a pretty good ship. It is a ship that impressed me when I actually got around to playing it. I don't think I've ever played it before. I've only ever seen it in the hands of bots. It seems to be one of the favorite ships for World of Warships to hand to bots when it doesn't have any particular reason to give them any particular ship. And so I was used to think of it as pretty terrible, but actually it's not bad at all. Armor's fine. Guns are pretty good. They have really good pen. 26 is very good for this tier. The alpha isn't particularly good, and I found the dispersion to be a little bit lacking. I don't know if I just got unlucky. It seems like the stats are not bad. It says 137 at 15 kilometers, which seems okay, but I found it to be a little scattershot. It's got defensive torpedoes, a hydro, a fighter, pretty good amount of hit points. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a totally serviceable ship. I was thinking about what I wanted to talk about specifically during this video, and I think one of the things I want to talk about is Lighthouse builds and what they are and where they come from and why they work. So Lighthouse builds are fairly common in French cruisers specifically. The Henri is one of the classics for a Lighthouse build. And the idea behind a Lighthouse build is that you forego any attempt at concealment. So you just do not take any of the concealment skills. On these low tier ships, I typically use a 10-point captain, which means I get one 4-point skill. And I did not choose concealment here, so I think my concealment is like 12.9, which is not very good. You might ask, why do you do that? Well, one thing, you get those 4 points back, so you can take a different skill, and specifically the skill that you usually take as a Citadel, this Kuma, which has no armor at all. The Kuma, by the way, is the hull for the Kitakami. Just a little tidbit there, a little trivia. Yeah, so why would you do that? Well, because you take top grade gunner, and top grade gunner is a skill which increases your main gun's reload by 8%. It also increases your secondary reload by 10%, but most importantly, your main gun reload by 8% when there are ships within your standard concealment. That doesn't mean you have to be spotted by those ships. So you can be behind an island, but as long as they are within your standard concealment radius, you get that 8% buff, which means, of course, that if you increase that concealment radius, then you increase the range at which you get that 8% buff. And 8% is pretty meaningful. That's pretty good. However, isn't it a bummer that you're giving up all that concealment? Well, not as much as you might think. This Lighthouse build style works really well on cruisers in particular, cruisers whose concealment is already kind of bad. So it's a little like taking the concealment skills is a little like polishing a turd. You might as well give up. And their gameplay style of these ships is that you hide behind islands, just like I did there, right? You're shooting over islands. And if you're shooting over islands, it doesn't particularly matter what your concealment is, right? Because you're not relying on your concealment to conceal yourself. These ships like this, they just get to an island and sit there until that position is untenable or you win the game, at which point they try, if it's an untenable position or they need to move up, they try to move to the next island. But they're never just like open water gunboating. And if they are, then they're firing, they're shooting. And if you're shooting, then you bloom to the range of your guns anyway. The only thing concealment does for you, is standard concealment stat, is hide you in open water when you are not shooting. And for ships like this, that's just very rarely something that they need. Now, of course, the downside there is that if you do happen to get caught in open water and you need to get away and you really would like to go dark, well, you're not gonna, right? You're gonna be stuck. And so you do end up using this play style where you're just really hugging islands, and it's up to you whether you find that fun or you find that interesting. A lot of people really do because they find it very tactically engaging to make these positioning decisions where you pick an island based on what you think is going to happen in the game, and then you get set up there. And if you chose correctly, you can really have an enormous amount of battle impact. If you choose incorrectly, you might get sunk, or you might, end up way out of position. Of course, at tier 4, that matters a little bit less, but it's way more important, like at the higher tiers. There's other reasons to not be overly chuffed, as they say, about your concealment. At tier 10, there's so many ways to end up getting spotted anyway that, frankly, like relying on your concealment to keep you concealed is not always the best plan, right? I mean, we've got, of course, aircraft carriers and subs and all. I mean, just Lord knows, right? All kinds of other things. Now, having said all that, do I recommend Lighthouse builds? Do I play Lighthouse builds? No, I don't. I think concealment is actually really important, and I use it all the time. But I'm just not this style of player. Like, the cruisers I prefer tend to not be the island hogging, who cares about my concealment? Like, I don't play the Henri. I don't play the French cruisers so much. So I can't really comment, in any kind of expert way on the quality of those builds and that gameplay experience. But I think if you want to learn what it's like, I mean, starting with the Duguay-Trouin is not a bad bet. It's not a bad ship. This game was actually quite fun. As I've said many times before, I really think the low tiers are fun when there's a lot of players, and I think we had 6 players per side in this game, which is plenty to get that like real game experience. And most of the players seemed to know what they were doing. I feel like I had good battle impact, got into some good positions, got some good shots in, lit a bunch of fires. The fire starting chance is pretty good on this ship. It's 13%. So yeah, I mean, I don't think this is a great ship. I think there's better tier 4 ships, to be sure, but it's a fine example of the kind of French cruiser line and the pluses and minuses that come with the French cruisers. So what else is there to say about like Lighthouse builds or the Duguay-Trouin? At this point in the game, I'm just pushing because the game's over and I just want to see if I can get a little more damage. I think one thing that I will comment on, since we have a few more minutes of this game, is these endings of games. I mean, I get it. Like, I don't really know exactly what I would do if I was wargaming, but it feels like these endings are kind of dull. I know they can't be terribly exciting to watch. I mean, at this point, this Congo and this, what's the other ship here? This Wyoming. Like, those are battleships that work well at range. And neither one of them have much of an impetus or much of a benefit they're not rewarded for closing the range with us. Like, they're not going to win the game. And the best way for them to get some padded stats is to just stay at range. But that makes it really boring. Like, that drags out like the last 5 minutes of this game. And they can't possibly like win that way. Of course, they're also not going to win by charging us. I remember an interesting story. I might as well tell a story. Yeah, I want to launch torpedoes at this guy, but the torpedoes are only 6 kilometers. I mentioned this before, but one really nice thing about having torpedoes on a ship, even if you never ever use them, like if the range is really bad, like on these, is that you can use it as a way to tell what the ship is doing. By which I mean, if you highlight them and select the torpedoes as your armament, you get that white line that tells you where to launch them. You get that line even if they're way out of range. And so that's super helpful because it tells you if they're turning left, if they're turning right, if they're increasing their turn, if they're slowing down. So I find that really useful. But anyway, quick story time. I remember reading about when chess computers were first getting serious and they were getting pretty good. And one of the problems that the human handlers had for the chess programs was that the software didn't know what to do when it determined that the game was a guaranteed win or a guaranteed loss. In other words, oftentimes the computer would figure out before the human player opponent did that from the computer's point of view, the game, there was nothing to do. There was nothing that could be done. It was a absolute guaranteed mate or it was an absolute guaranteed loss. And the problem is the computer would then either just crash, right? The software would hit a bad spot, or it would just kind of start acting really erratically and randomly. And the humans would get really disappointed because, say you're playing a computer chess opponent and you're starting to win and you can tell that you're winning. And then all of a sudden the computer just appears to act randomly. You're going to think that it had a hissy fit. You're going to anthropomorphize it and be like, you just pitched a fit and you threw the game, right? Much like in World of Warships, if somebody were to just start driving their ship in a really random and erratic and stupid way, and they're just like, well, I'm losing, so I'm just gonna give up. Of course, that's not what was happening because computers don't have emotions like that. The computer was just unable to choose between options when all the options were equally bad. And I find that, of course, why am I telling this story? Because that's kind of what it's like at the end of some of these World of Warships games, right? A lot of times you get to this point where, like, the red team's not going to win. There's no universe. This World of Warships is not that kind of game, right? This Wyoming and this Congo cannot somehow, magically, like, outplay us and win the game. It's not like Call of Duty or, Quake, where you could just run around and with your skill just shoot all the enemy opponents and win the game anyway. That's not going to happen. And so, like, what motivates you to act in a particular way, right? And of course, for these guys, they're motivated by just trying to pad their stats and enjoying playing their ship the way it's best meant to be played. And I can't fault them for that exactly, right? But it's just like, man, can we get on to the next game, right? Can we get back to port? Like this, well, I mean, of course, it depends on where you play World of Warships. So obviously, there's lots of reasons to play other than just your win-loss record. I mean, it is fun to shoot the guns and blow up enemy ships. And, I'm not having zero fun here, right? I get to shoot my guns and hit this guy and do damage. And that's engaging, I suppose, in a way. But often it really drags. And of course, and you probably know what I'm going to say next, certain classes like submarines and aircraft carriers make this problem way worse. So yeah, I mean, I don't know exactly what to do about it, but it's just kind of an issue. Doesn't usually come up at the lower tiers simply because there's so many bots, but came up in this game. But anyway, yeah, the Duguay-Trouin, good ship. Not a bad place to try out a Lighthouse build. I had fun in this game. I feel like the guns are pretty effective and the armor held up, and yeah, I thought that it was a better ship than I was expecting. So that's it for this video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.